Hey guys! Tonight we're climbing the treacherous mountain path to Delphi, where sulphurous vapours seep from ancient cracks in the earth and the most powerful oracle in the ancient world sits waiting to deliver prophecies that could change your life forever, or drive you completely mad. You can feel the thin mountain air burning your lungs as you ascend the sacred slopes of Mount Parnassus, each step bringing you closer to the mysterious temple where Apollo himself supposedly speaks through the lips of a woman who may have lost her sanity long ago to serve the gods. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, about why ancient Greeks made life-altering decisions based on cryptic riddles delivered by drug-addled priestesses in underground chambers. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. I'd love to hear where and when you started watching this video, or perhaps what draws you to these tales of ancient mystery and divine madness. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. Your sandaled feet crunch against the worn stones of the sacred way, the ancient pilgrimage route that winds up the mountainside toward the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Every step echoes with the footfalls of countless seekers who have made this same journey over the past 8 centuries, carrying their desperate questions about love, war, and destiny to the most famous oracle in the Mediterranean world. The path curves around massive boulders and past smaller shrines, each one a testament to the power that radiates from the summit where Apollo's voice allegedly pierces the veil between mortal and divine realms. The climb tests your endurance as the altitude increases and the air grows thinner, but you're driven forward by the same desperate hope that has motivated pilgrims since the 8th century BCE, when the Oracle of Delphi first began attracting visitors from across the known world. Kings and commoners alike have walked this route, though their experiences upon reaching the summit varied dramatically depending on their social status, financial resources, and political connections with the temple hierarchy. As you round another switchback in the ascending path, the landscape opens to reveal the first glimpse of your destination, a complex of gleaming marble buildings nestled against the dramatic cliff face of Mount Parnassus. The Temple of Apollo dominates the sacred precinct, its columns rising majestically above a sea of smaller structures that house the priests, treasuries, and support facilities required to maintain the ancient world's most sophisticated religious operation. The approach to Delphi requires not just physical stamina but a mental preparation for an encounter that could shatter your worldview or provide the guidance you desperately seek. Ancient Greeks believed that Apollo chose this location because of its position at the exact centre of the world, the omphalos, or navel stone, marking the spot where Zeus's eagles met when flying from opposite ends of the earth. Modern geological surveys reveal that Delphi sits atop a complex network of underground fissures that release ethylene gas, creating natural intoxicating effects that may explain the oracle's prophetic abilities. The sound of your breathing mingles with the distant chanting of priests conducting their daily rituals as you climb higher into the rarefied atmosphere where mortals allegedly commune with gods. The temple complex grows larger with each step, revealing architectural details that speak to the enormous wealth and political influence concentrated at this sacred site. Golden offerings from grateful city-states gleam in the afternoon sunlight, while marble statues commemorate military victories achieved through divine guidance received from the oracle. An unusual detail about Delphi involves the sacred python that Apollo supposedly slew to claim this prophetic site. The massive serpent's decomposing body allegedly created the toxic vapours that enable divine communication, though ancient sources disagree about whether the monster was real or mythological. This origin story reflects the Greeks' understanding that prophecy requires some form of death and decay to enable communication between the living and divine realms. The final approach to the temple sanctuary reveals the crowds of fellow pilgrims who have travelled from across the Mediterranean to seek prophetic guidance. Wealthy merchants from Corinth mingle with Spartan warriors, while Athenian philosophers debate divine inspiration with Egyptian mystics, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere that reflects Delphi's international reputation as the premier source of divine wisdom in the ancient world. the massive temple doors stand open, revealing glimpses of the interior chambers where the most sacred rituals unfold. Smoke drifts from various altars while the sound of bronze implements striking marble surfaces creates an otherworldly percussion that sets your nerves on edge. The air itself feels charged with supernatural potential, as if the very atoms around you vibrate with divine energy, waiting to be released through prophetic utterance. Historians still argue whether the Oracle of Delphi represented genuine divine communication or sophisticated religious theatre designed to consolidate political power through mysterious pronouncements that could be interpreted to support any desired outcome. Though the documented influence of Delphic prophecies on major historical events suggests that ancient leaders took these pronouncements seriously regardless of their supernatural authenticity. Your heart races as you approach the point where mortal questions will meet divine answers, where your carefully prepared inquiries will be submitted to the mysterious process that transforms human speech into godly wisdom. The weight of anticipation presses down upon you like the thin mountain air, making each breath a conscious effort as you prepare to enter a world where logic surrenders to mystery and human understanding yields to divine revelation. The temple complex buzzes with activity as priests, attendants, and fellow suppliants move through their respective roles in the grand theatre of prophecy that has operated continuously for centuries. Yet beneath the organised religious activity, you sense something darker, an undercurrent of fear, desperation, and barely controlled madness that hints at the terrible price paid by those who serve as conduits between human and divine consciousness. Do you remember that undercurrent of fear and madness you sensed beneath the organised religious activity? That ominous feeling becomes understandable when you learn about the bizarre process used to select the Pythia, the woman who serves as Apollo's prophetic voice, through qualification rituals so disturbing they would violate every modern standard of human dignity, while revealing how the ancient world treated women as expendable vessels for divine communication rather than autonomous human beings deserving basic respect. You're ushered into a restricted area of the temple complex where the selection ceremonies take place, witnessing procedures that transform ordinary village women into the most powerful religious figure in the ancient world through tests that prioritize susceptibility to possession over intelligence. Wisdom, or spiritual insight. The process resembles auditions for a theatrical role, where the successful candidate must demonstrate their ability to lose control of their own consciousness, while maintaining enough physical stability to survive repeated exposure to mind-altering substances. The initial screening involves examining candidates from local villages around Delphi, with priests seeking women who display specific characteristics that supposedly indicate divine favour and prophetic potential. The ideal Pythia candidate must be over 50 years old, past childbearing age to avoid complications from pregnancy, while demonstrating peasant origins that ensure she lacks the education or social connections that might interfere with priestly control over her pronouncements. A crucial requirement involves testing each candidate's reaction to the sacred vapours that seep from the underground chamber where prophetic sessions occur. Prospective Pythias must demonstrate their ability to enter trance states when exposed to these mysterious fumes while maintaining enough vocal capacity to deliver coherent utterances that priests can interpret as divine messages. Women who prove immune to the vapours or who react too violently are immediately eliminated from consideration. The selection ritual includes a disturbing ceremony where candidates must spend a night alone in the underground prophetic chamber, breathing the toxic vapours while demonstrating their capacity to channel divine voices without completely losing their sanity. Many candidates emerge from this test experience permanently changed. Some refuse to speak again. Others develop seizure disorders, while a few claim to hear divine voices constantly for the remainder of their lives. The successful Pythia candidate must pass additional tests that evaluate her willingness to surrender personal identity in service to Apollo's prophetic mission. This involves renouncing family relationships, personal possessions, and individual ambitions while accepting permanent residence within the temple complex under strict priestly supervision that monitors every aspect of her daily existence. The transformation from village woman to divine oracle requires complete submission to institutional control. The physical qualifications for serving as Pythia include specific bodily characteristics that priests believe enhance receptivity to divine possession. Candidates must demonstrate robust respiratory systems capable of withstanding repeated exposure to underground vapours, while possessing vocal stamina sufficient for delivering extended prophetic sessions that can last several hours during peak pilgrimage seasons, when demand for divine guidance reaches maximum intensity. The psychological evaluation process seeks women who display particular mental characteristics that facilitate prophetic trance states, while maintaining enough cognitive function to articulate divine messages in comprehensible Greek. Priests look for candidates who show signs of natural dissociative tendencies, the ability to separate consciousness from immediate physical reality, though they must avoid selecting women whose mental instability might compromise the oracle's reputation for divine authenticity. An unusual aspect of Pythia selection involves the requirement that candidates demonstrate immunity to certain forms of psychological manipulation, while remaining vulnerable to the specific techniques used by temple priests to induce prophetic states. This delicate balance ensures that the oracle responds to official priestly direction, while resisting external attempts to influence her pronouncements for unauthorized political or personal purposes. The training period for newly selected Pythias involves months of preparation that acclimates them to the toxic vapours, while teaching them the vocal techniques required for delivering prophecies in the distinctive style associated with Delphic oracular pronouncements. This training process has a high mortality rate, as some women prove unable to adapt to the chemical and psychological stresses associated with regular prophetic sessions. The succession planning for the Pythia position involves maintaining multiple candidates in various stages of preparation, since the demanding nature of oracular service typically results in shortened lifespans that require frequent replacement of the primary oracle. Backup Pythias undergo the same selection and training procedures while serving in secondary roles until promoted to primary oracle status through the death, madness, or incapacitation of their predecessor. The social status transformation experienced by women selected as Pythia represents one of the most dramatic class elevations possible in ancient Greek society, as peasant women suddenly acquire religious authority that exceeds most male priests, while commanding respect from kings and emperors who seek their prophetic guidance. However, this elevated status comes at the cost of personal freedom, family relationships, and normal human experiences. The regional recruitment system for Pythia candidates reflects the temple's understanding that local women possess cultural knowledge and linguistic patterns that enhance the authenticity of oracular pronouncements for Greek visitors. Foreign women rarely qualify for Pythia positions, since their accents or unfamiliarity with Greek cultural references might compromise the perceived legitimacy of their prophetic utterances. Historians still argue whether the Pythia selection process reflected genuine religious criteria or practical administrative concerns about maintaining institutional control over prophetic pronouncements, though the consistent emphasis on candidates' vulnerability to manipulation suggests that political considerations influenced religious requirements for this crucially important position. The medical aspects of Pythia selection involve evaluating candidates' capacity to survive repeated exposure to toxic vapours without developing fatal respiratory or neurological complications. Temple physicians maintain detailed records about which types of women prove most resilient to the chemical stresses of oracular service. Though their medical knowledge remains limited by ancient understanding of toxicology and brain function, the ceremonial aspects of Pythia installation include elaborate rituals that symbolically transfer the candidate's identity from mortal woman to divine vessel, involving procedures that resemble death and rebirth symbolism. These ceremonies serve both religious and psychological functions by helping candidates accept their new roles while demonstrating to observers the supernatural transformation that enables prophetic abilities. As you observe the selection process that reduces women to interchangeable components in a religious machine designed to generate divine authority for priestly and political purposes, you begin to understand the human cost of ancient prophecy, how the oracle system transformed individual women into disposable resources consumed by an institution that valued their susceptibility to possession over their humanity, dignity, or personal welfare. Do you remember how the selection process reduced women to disposable resources consumed by the Oracle institution? That dehumanization intensifies dramatically during the preparation rituals that transform the chosen Pythia into a prophetic vessel through purification rites so invasive and chemical treatments so dangerous they systematically destroy her individual identity while optimizing her body and mind for divine possession that may kill her during the process. You're witnessing the 3-day purification ceremony that precedes every major prophetic session, watching as temple attendants subject the Pythia to procedures that would constitute torture if applied to anyone with legal rights or social protection. The rituals begin with complete isolation in underground chambers where the Oracle designate must fast while breathing concentrated vapours that alter her brain chemistry and prepare her nervous system for the violent possession experience that supposedly enables divine communication. The physical purification process starts with ritual bathing in the Castalian spring, whose sacred waters are believed to wash away mortal contamination that might interfere with divine possession. However, the spring water contains dissolved minerals and natural chemicals that enhance the absorption of subsequent toxic substances while creating skin sensitivity that intensifies the Oracle's reaction to ceremonial preparations. The bathing ritual lasts for hours and often leaves participants with chemical burns disguised as spiritual purification. The dietary preparation involves forced consumption of specific foods and beverages that allegedly enhance prophetic receptivity, while actually serving as delivery systems for mind-altering compounds derived from local plants. The Oracle must consume large quantities of barley water mixed with honey, a seemingly innocent mixture that contains ergot alkaloids from contaminated grain that produce hallucinogenic effects similar to modern LSD while creating the dissociative states that priests interpret as divine possession. The respiratory preparation represents the most dangerous aspect of Oracle conditioning, as temple attendants force the Pythia to inhale concentrated vapours from burning laurel leaves, barley, and other sacred plants whose combustion products contain psychoactive compounds that damage lung tissue while inducing altered consciousness states. This forced inhalation process often results in permanent respiratory damage that shortens the Oracle's lifespan, while making her increasingly dependent on continued exposure to these toxic substances. The psychological preparation involves sensory deprivation techniques that weaken the Oracle's connection to normal reality, while making her more susceptible to external suggestion and divine possession experiences. Attendants place the Pythia in completely dark chambers where she must remain motionless for extended periods while listening to repetitive chanting that creates hypnotic states conducive to trance induction and loss of personal identity. The ceremonial vestments used during Oracle preparation include specially treated fabrics that have been soaked in chemical solutions derived from sacred plants and minerals. These garments continue releasing psychoactive compounds through skin contact, while creating visual and tactile sensations that enhance the Oracle's altered consciousness states. The clothing itself becomes a delivery system for mind-altering substances that maintain the Oracle's dissociative condition throughout prophetic sessions. The sacred jewellery and accessories worn by the Pythia include items that serve practical functions beyond symbolic religious significance. Bronze ornaments contain trace amounts of copper compounds that enter the bloodstream through prolonged skin contact, while sacred stones and crystals have been treated with chemical preparations that continue affecting the Oracle's nervous system through absorption and inhalation during extended prophetic sessions. An unusual aspect of Oracle preparation involves the use of sacred serpents kept within the temple complex, live snakes whose venom is harvested and processed into sublingual applications that create controlled poisoning effects designed to enhance prophetic trance states. The snake venom contains neurotoxins that alter brain function while creating the physical convulsions and altered speech patterns that observers interpret as divine possession rather than systematic poisoning. The temperature manipulation during preparation rituals involves exposing the Oracle to extreme heat and cold that stress her physiological systems while making her more susceptible to chemical influences and psychological manipulation. The Pythia must endure sessions in heated underground chambers, followed by exposure to cold mountain air, creating physical shock that weakens her resistance to subsequent mind-altering procedures. The musical preparation includes exposure to specific sound frequencies and rhythmic patterns that induce altered consciousness states, while preparing the oracle's vocal apparatus for the distinctive speech patterns associated with prophetic utterances. Temple musicians use instruments tuned to frequencies that resonate with brainwave patterns associated with dissociative states, creating acoustic conditions that enhance chemical and psychological preparation effects. The social isolation enforced during preparation periods serves both practical and psychological functions by eliminating external influences that might interfere with prophetic conditioning while increasing the oracle's dependence on temple personnel for all basic needs. This isolation breaks down normal social bonds and personal identity markers that might resist the transformation process required for effective divine possession. The timing of preparation rituals follows complex schedules that coordinate chemical treatments with astronomical events and religious calendar observances believed to enhance divine communication potential. The most intensive preparation sessions occur during specific lunar phases when the psychoactive effects of natural toxins reach maximum potency, while atmospheric conditions optimize the concentration of underground vapors. The medical monitoring during preparation involves temple physicians who track the oracle's physical responses to chemical treatments while adjusting dosages to achieve optimal prophetic states without causing immediate death. These medical practitioners develop expertise in managing toxic exposure levels while maintaining the oracle's functional capacity for delivering coherent prophetic utterances despite severe chemical impairment. Historians still argue whether the elaborate preparation rituals reflected genuine religious beliefs about divine possession requirements, or sophisticated understanding of how chemical manipulation could create altered consciousness states that appeared supernatural to ancient observers. Though the systematic nature of these procedures suggests intentional exploitation of psychoactive compounds rather than accidental discovery, the documentation of preparation procedures in temple records reveals the institutional nature of oracle conditioning, with detailed instructions for chemical preparations, timing schedules, and emergency medical interventions that demonstrate systematic understanding of how to manipulate human consciousness through controlled exposure to toxic substances. These records suggest that oracle preparation involved deliberate pharmaceutical experimentation rather than spontaneous religious inspiration. The recovery periods between major prophetic sessions require extended medical care as the oracle's body struggles to eliminate accumulated toxins while repairing damage caused by repeated exposure to mind-altering substances. Many Pythias develop chronic health conditions that reflect long-term chemical exposure. Though temple physicians frame these medical problems as spiritual sacrifices required for divine service rather than occupational injuries requiring treatment. As you watch the final stages of oracle preparation, observing how systematic chemical and psychological manipulation transforms a human being into a dissociative vessel primed for possession by forces beyond her control, you realize that ancient prophecy depended on deliberate destruction of individual consciousness to create the appearance of divine communication, a process that sacrificed human dignity and health to maintain religious authority and political power. Do you remember how the preparation process systematically destroyed individual consciousness to create vessels for divine communication? That deliberate mental destruction reaches its horrifying climax as you descend into the sacred chamber where the chemically prepared Pythia awaits divine possession. Her drugged mind teetering on the edge of madness, while toxic vapours seep from underground fissures that may represent the gateway to the underworld, or simply geological formations that generate hallucinogenic gases capable of turning human speech into incomprehensible divine babble. You follow the high priest through narrow stone corridors that lead deep beneath the temple of Apollo, your torchlight flickering against walls carved with sacred symbols that seem to writhe and dance in the uncertain illumination. The air grows thick with sulphurous vapours that make your eyes water and throat burn, forcing you to breathe shallowly while wondering how anyone could survive extended exposure to these toxic fumes that ancient Greeks believed carried the breath of the gods themselves. The sacred chamber opens before you like a scene from a fever dream, a circular room carved from living rock with a narrow chasm splitting the floor from which mysterious vapours rise in ghostly tendrils. The Pythia sits on a bronze tripod positioned directly over the geological fissure, her body already beginning to convulse as the toxic gases assault her nervous system and trigger the violent transformation that priests interpret as divine possession rather than chemical poisoning. The chamber's acoustics amplify every sound into supernatural resonance as the Pythia's breathing becomes laboured and her posture shifts from human alertness to something resembling mechanical rigidity. Her eyes roll backward until only the whites remain visible, while her hands grip the tripod's sides with unnatural strength that suggests neurological damage rather than divine inspiration. The preparation rituals have transformed her into a biological sensor, designed to react violently to environmental toxins. The geological formation beneath the chamber includes intersecting fault lines that release a complex mixture of gases from deep underground sources, creating atmospheric conditions that would challenge modern industrial safety standards, while providing the ancient world with its most convincing demonstration of supernatural communication. Modern analysis reveals that these vapours contain ethylene, methane, and hydrogen sulfide in concentrations that produce hallucinogenic effects, while potentially causing permanent brain damage. The moment of possession begins with violent physical convulsions that shake the Pythia's entire body, as the toxic vapours overwhelm her nervous system and trigger seizure-like responses that ancient observers interpreted as divine invasion rather than chemical poisoning. Her voice changes from normal human speech to an otherworldly shriek that echoes through the chamber with supernatural resonance, enhanced by the room's acoustic properties and your own altered state from vapour exposure. The prophetic utterances that emerge from the Pythia's lips bear little resemblance to coherent human language, consisting primarily of broken syllables, animal-like sounds, and fragmentary words that priests must later interpret and organise into meaningful prophecies. The oracle's chemical impairment makes her incapable of delivering complex messages, requiring priestly intervention to transform her toxic babbling into the sophisticated predictions that enhance Delphi's reputation for divine wisdom. The physical effects of prolonged vapour exposure on the Pythia include violent trembling, respiratory distress, and loss of motor control that creates the appearance of supernatural possession while actually representing acute chemical poisoning that could prove fatal if exposure continues beyond carefully calculated time limits. Temple physicians monitor these sessions to ensure the oracle survives long enough to complete her prophetic duties before toxic exposure causes permanent incapacitation. An unusual aspect of prophetic sessions involves the presence of sacred snakes that live within the chamber's rocky crevices, serpents whose venom may contribute to the oracle's altered state through bites that inject additional neurotoxins into her bloodstream, while creating the impression that chthonic deities participate directly in prophetic communications. These snakes serve both symbolic and pharmacological functions in the complex chemistry of divine possession. The temperature variations within the chamber create additional physiological stress as the Pythia experiences rapid shifts between the heated vapours rising from underground fissures and the cool mountain air circulating through ventilation shafts. These thermal changes enhance the toxic effects of chemical exposure while creating physical sensations that contribute to the overwhelming sensory experience that destroys normal consciousness and enables apparent divine communication. The lighting effects within the chamber rely on carefully positioned bronze mirrors and oil lamps that create shifting patterns of illumination designed to enhance the supernatural atmosphere while concealing the mechanical aspects of oracle preparation from observing visitors. The interplay of light and shadow transforms the Pythia's chemical seizures into visually impressive demonstrations of divine possession that convince observers of supernatural authenticity. The duration of prophetic sessions varies based on the oracle's physical condition, concentration of underground vapours, and the number of questions requiring divine attention. Though most sessions last between 30 minutes and 2 hours before toxic exposure threatens the Pythia's survival. Longer sessions often result in permanent neurological damage that shortens the oracle's lifespan, while compromising her effectiveness for future prophetic duties. The recording of prophetic utterances involves multiple priests who attempt to transcribe the oracle's incoherent vocalizations while she remains in her chemically induced trance state. These scribes often record contradictory versions of the same session, suggesting that the Pythia's toxic babbling provides insufficient raw material for creating coherent prophecies without substantial editorial interpretation and creative embellishment by temple personnel. The emergency medical procedures maintained during prophetic sessions include techniques for reviving oracles who lose consciousness from vapour exposure, while methods for treating chemical poisoning symptoms that might interfere with prophetic performance. Temple physicians develop expertise in managing toxic exposure levels while maintaining the oracle's functional capacity, despite severe impairment that would incapacitate normal individuals. Historians still argue whether the Pythia's prophetic utterances represented genuine divine communication, filtered through human limitations, or simply the predictable result of chemical poisoning that created altered consciousness states, easily manipulated by priestly interpretation. Though the documented toxicity of the chamber environment suggests that supernatural explanations may be unnecessary for understanding oracle phenomena. The aftermath of prophetic sessions requires extensive recovery periods, as the Pythia's body struggles to eliminate accumulated toxins, while her nervous system attempts to recover from chemical assault that may have caused permanent damage. Many oracles develop chronic health conditions that reflect repeated exposure to underground vapours, though temple physicians attribute these medical problems to spiritual exhaustion rather than occupational poisoning. As you watch the Pythia convulse in her toxic trance while incomprehensible sounds pour from her lips, and priests frantically scribble notes that will later become the divine wisdom sought by kings and commoners across the Mediterranean world, you realise that ancient prophecy depended on systematic chemical torture that transformed human suffering into religious authority, a process that turned one woman's agony into an entire civilization's source of divine guidance. Do you remember how the Pythia's chemical torture transformed human suffering into religious authority? The true horror becomes clear when you examine the geological and chemical secrets underlying those sacred vapours, discovering that Delphi's location represents a natural pharmaceutical laboratory, where underground geological processes generate mind-altering compounds that ancient priests learned to exploit for creating controlled intoxication states that appeared supernatural while actually representing sophisticated understanding of the environmental toxicology. You're studying the rocky foundations beneath the Temple of Apollo with modern geological equipment that reveals the complex chemistry responsible for centuries of prophetic utterances, mapping underground fissures that release a cocktail of psychoactive gases whose effects on human consciousness were deliberately harnessed by ancient religious authorities who understood drug effects without comprehending their chemical mechanisms. The oracle system depended on environmental poisoning disguised as divine communication. The primary geological formation consists of intersecting limestone fault lines that create pathways for gas emissions from deeper underground sources, including pockets of petroleum deposits that release ethylene, a colourless, sweet-smelling gas that produces euphoric intoxication followed by hallucinations and loss of consciousness when inhaled in sufficient concentrations. Modern anesthesiologists recognise ethylene as an effective surgical anaesthetic that was used in medical procedures until safer alternatives became available. The secondary gas emissions include hydrogen sulfide, which creates the characteristic sulphurous odour associated with Delphic prophecy, while contributing additional neurological effects that enhance the oracle's altered consciousness states. Hydrogen sulfide exposure produces initial euphoria, followed by respiratory depression and potential death at higher concentrations, creating a narrow therapeutic window that temple personnel learn to navigate through careful exposure management and emergency medical intervention. The methane releases from underground organic deposits add another layer of intoxication that combines with ethylene and hydrogen sulfide to create a complex chemical mixture whose synergistic effects exceed the individual impact of any single compound. This natural gas combination produces dissociative states characterized by out-of-body experiences, auditory hallucinations, and loss of normal speech patterns that ancient observers interpreted as divine possession rather than predictable chemical poisoning. The seasonal variation in gas emissions reflects underground temperature changes and atmospheric pressure fluctuations that affect the concentration and composition of vapours rising through the geological fissures. Ancient temple records show that prophetic sessions were scheduled to coincide with periods of optimal gas emission, suggesting that priests understood the environmental factors that enhanced the oracle's chemical intoxication, despite lacking scientific knowledge about atmospheric chemistry. The concentration levels of different gases vary throughout the prophetic chamber based on air circulation patterns, underground pressure changes, and the specific geological formations that channel emissions toward the surface. Temple architects positioned the oracle's tripod at the optimal location for maximum vapor exposure, while maintaining ventilation systems that prevented fatal gas accumulation that could kill observers along with the Pythia herself. The additional chemical enhancement methods used by temple personnel include burning specific plant materials that release psychoactive compounds when combined with the natural underground emissions. Laurel leaves, sacred to Apollo, contain compounds that produce mild hallucinogenic effects when burned, while barley contaminated with ergot fungus releases alkaloids similar to LSD that enhance the oracle's chemically induced trance states. An unusual aspect of Delphic intoxication involves the deliberate use of carbon monoxide from braziers and oil lamps positioned within the poorly ventilated underground chamber, creating oxygen depletion that enhances the effects of other toxic gases while producing the confusion and disorientation that characterize prophetic sessions. Carbon monoxide poisoning creates euphoria followed by unconsciousness, providing another tool for manipulating the oracle's consciousness. The purification rituals that preceded prophetic sessions included consumption of substances that enhanced the oracle's sensitivity to vapor exposure, while prolonging the duration of intoxication effects. Sacred beverages contained plant extracts that inhibited liver function and slowed the metabolism of toxic compounds, ensuring that the Pythia remained in altered consciousness states for extended periods, despite her body's natural attempts to eliminate poisonous substances. The timing of vapor exposure follows careful protocols that maximize psychoactive effects while minimizing fatal outcomes, with temple personnel monitoring the oracle's physical responses to determine optimal exposure durations. This medical management requires extensive experience with toxic gas effects and knowledge of emergency treatment procedures that could revive oracles who lost consciousness from chemical overdoses. The geographical factors that make Delphi unique include its position at the intersection of multiple geological fault systems that create unusually high concentrations of psychoactive gas emissions in a relatively small area. Similar geological formations exist elsewhere in Greece, but none combine the specific chemical composition and concentration levels that enabled reliable intoxication effects suitable for religious exploitation. The chemical analysis of modern vapor samples from Delphic fissures confirms the presence of ethylene, methane, and hydrogen sulfide in concentrations sufficient to produce the altered consciousness states documented in ancient sources. Contemporary exposure to these gas mixtures creates effects identical to those described in historical accounts of oracle behaviour, demonstrating that supernatural explanations are unnecessary for understanding prophetic phenomena. The enhancement techniques developed by temple chemists include methods for concentrating vapour emissions through underground channel modifications and ventilation controls that direct gas flows towards specific locations within the prophetic chamber. These engineering modifications suggest sophisticated understanding of how to optimize environmental conditions for achieving desired intoxication effects. The antidote preparations maintained by temple physicians include treatments for gas poisoning that could revive oracles who suffered potentially fatal exposure to underground vapours. These medical interventions involve herbs and compounds that counteract specific toxic effects while enabling rapid recovery that allows oracles to survive multiple prophetic sessions despite cumulative chemical damage. Historians still argue whether ancient temple personnel understood the chemical nature of Delphic vapours or simply observed their effects without comprehending the underlying toxicological mechanisms. Though the systematic optimization of exposure conditions suggests practical knowledge that exceeded theoretical understanding of chemical processes, the regional survey of similar oracle sites reveals that most prophetic locations coincide with geological formations that produce psychoactive gas emissions, suggesting that ancient Greeks identified and exploited natural intoxication sources throughout their territory, while developing religious explanations for environmental phenomena that exceeded their scientific understanding of atmospheric chemistry. The long-term health effects documented among former oracles include respiratory damage, neurological disorders, and cognitive impairment that reflect chronic exposure to toxic gas mixtures over extended periods. These medical conditions provide evidence of the severe physical cost associated with serving as prophetic vessels in an environment designed to maximize chemical intoxication effects. As you examine the complex chemistry underlying Delphic prophecy while measuring gas concentrations that would trigger modern emergency evacuation procedures, you realize that ancient Greek religion achieved its most impressive supernatural effects through deliberate environmental poisoning that transformed geological accidents into divine communication systems, proving that religious authority often depends on scientific ignorance that allows natural phenomena to appear miraculous to populations lacking technical knowledge. Do you remember how Delphi achieved supernatural effects through environmental poisoning that transformed geological accidents into divine communication? That same principle operated across dozens of oracle sites scattered throughout the ancient Greek world, each one exploiting different environmental hazards and chemical phenomena to create prophetic experiences that convinced visitors of divine communication while actually exposing them to toxic substances, dangerous animals, or psychological manipulation techniques that exceeded Delphi's sophistication in their creativity and cruelty. You're travelling the ancient oracle circuit that connected prophetic sites across the Mediterranean, discovering that Greeks developed an entire industry based on exploiting natural phenomena that produced altered consciousness states suitable for religious interpretation. Each oracle location represents a different approach to manufacturing divine communication through environmental manipulation, creating a network of prophetic destinations that offered specialized services for specific types of questions or clientele. The Oracle of Zeus at Dodona, located in northwestern Greece, represents the oldest prophetic site in the Hellenic world, where divine messages were supposedly communicated through the rustling of sacred oak leaves interpreted by priestesses who spent years learning to decode wind patterns and natural sounds. However, the site's location in a valley that channels high-frequency wind currents creates acoustic phenomena that generate infrasound, sound waves below human hearing range that cause unease, anxiety, and hallucinations in sensitive individuals. The Oracle of Trophonius at Lebedia required visitors to undergo terrifying initiation rituals that included crawling through narrow underground tunnels while experiencing complete sensory deprivation designed to create psychological breakdown that priests interpreted as divine communication. The cave system used for these oracles contained high concentrations of carbon dioxide that created oxygen deprivation effects, while the claustrophobic environment triggered panic responses that enhanced susceptibility to suggestion and false memory formation. The necromantic oracle at the river Acheron in Epirus specialized in communication with the dead through ceremonies that exposed visitors to toxic plants and underground vapors, while forcing them to drink waters of forgetfulness that contained memory-altering compounds derived from local vegetation. The site's reputation for enabling conversations with deceased relatives attracted desperate mourners who underwent chemical manipulation that created vivid hallucinations of ghostly encounters. The Oracle of Apollo at Claros utilized a different approach involving sacred springs whose waters contained dissolved minerals that produced mild intoxication effects when consumed in large quantities during prophetic ceremonies. The priests who delivered oracles at Claros drank directly from these mineral springs before pronouncing prophecies, creating a chemical delivery system that altered their consciousness while maintaining the appearance of divine inspiration rather than pharmaceutical manipulation. The Oracle of Demeter at Aegae employed agricultural symbolism in prophetic rituals that included consumption of grain products contaminated with ergot fungus, creating hallucinogenic experiences that visitors interpreted as visions of the afterlife and divine agricultural wisdom. The ergot alkaloids produced effects similar to LSD, while the religious context provided framework for interpreting these drug experiences as meaningful divine communication rather than chemical poisoning. An unusual oracle site at the Temple of Asclepius in Epidaurus specialized in medical prophecy through temple sleep rituals, where visitors spent nights in underground chambers populated by sacred snakes whose venom contributed to the healing visions that supposedly provided medical guidance. The snake bites delivered measured doses of neurotoxins that created altered consciousness states, while the temple environment suggested medical interpretations for hallucinogenic experiences. The Oracle of Poseidon at Aegina operated from coastal caves where tidal action and underground water systems created acoustic effects that amplified human voices into supernatural resonance, while saltwater spray contained microorganisms that produced mild intoxication when inhaled over extended periods. The maritime location enhanced the mystical atmosphere while providing natural chemical enhancement for prophetic experiences. The Sibylline oracles scattered across the Greek world represented a different model of prophetic authority based on individual women who claimed direct divine inspiration without requiring elaborate temple infrastructure or environmental manipulation. These independent oracles often relied on personal charisma and psychological manipulation rather than chemical enhancement, though many incorporated plant-based intoxicants into their prophetic practices. The Oracle of Apollo at Didyma employed elaborate water rituals where the Pythia equivalent sat on a throne, positioned over sacred springs while inhaling vapours from burning aromatic substances that enhanced the psychoactive effects of minerals dissolved in the spring water. The combination of chemical and psychological manipulation created prophetic experiences that rivaled Delphi's reputation while serving the Greek cities of Asia Minor. The regional specialization among oracle sites created a competitive marketplace where different temples promoted their particular advantages for specific types of prophetic inquiry. Military oracles specialized in battle predictions. Agricultural oracles focused on farming and weather forecasts, while medical oracles concentrated on healing and disease management, creating religious market segmentation that maximized prophetic revenue across diverse customer bases. The quality control systems developed among competing oracle sites included standardized training for prophetic personnel, certification procedures for legitimate oracular institutions, and quality assurance measures that maintained customer satisfaction while protecting the overall reputation of Greek prophetic services. This religious regulation prevented fraudulent operators from damaging the industry's credibility through obviously fake prophecies. The transportation networks connecting oracle sites created pilgrimage routes that enabled religious tourism while spreading prophetic techniques and chemical knowledge among different temple communities. Professional oracle consultants travelled between sites sharing expertise about environmental manipulation and chemical enhancement while maintaining trade secrets that protected each location's competitive advantages. The seasonal scheduling of oracle operations across different sites created a prophetic calendar that maximized revenue while managing environmental factors that affected the quality of intoxication experiences. Some oracles operated primarily during specific seasons when geological or atmospheric conditions enhanced their chemical effects, while others maintained year-round services through artificial enhancement techniques. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of oracle sites reflected genuine religious demand for divine guidance or entrepreneurial exploitation of superstitious populations through systematic fraud disguised as spiritual service. Though the documented sophistication of environmental manipulation techniques suggests that oracle operators possessed practical knowledge that exceeded their theoretical understanding of chemical and psychological principles. The documentation of oracle procedures across different sites reveals standardized approaches to chemical manipulation and psychological control that suggest information sharing among religious professionals who developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for creating convincing supernatural experiences through environmental exploitation and pharmaceutical intervention. The decline of minor oracle sites often resulted from competition with more successful operations, rather than loss of religious belief, suggesting that prophetic services operated according to market principles, where customer satisfaction and competitive advantage determined institutional survival rather than theological authenticity or divine approval. As you complete your survey of Greece's oracle network, documenting the diverse methods used to create supernatural experiences through environmental manipulation, chemical enhancement, and psychological control, you realize that ancient Greek religion represented a sophisticated industry built on exploiting human vulnerability to toxic substances and altered consciousness states. proving that religious authority often depends on systematic deception that transforms natural phenomena into divine communication through chemical and psychological manipulation. Do you remember how Greek religion represented a sophisticated industry built on exploiting human vulnerability? That exploitation required professional management by temple priests who transformed divine consultation into bureaucratic processes that controlled access to prophetic wisdom through elaborate administrative systems designed to maximize revenue while maintaining plausible deniability about the artificial nature of oracle experiences, creating religious institutions that operated more like corrupt government agencies than spiritual communities. You're entering the administrative complex at Delphi where the real power behind prophetic operations resides, not in the drugged Pythia suffering chemical torture in underground chambers, but in the offices of high priests who manage appointment schedules, interpret incoherent oracle utterances, and negotiate political arrangements that determine which prophecies support which clients, depending on their ability to pay premium fees for favourable divine guidance. The hierarchical structure of oracle administration resembles modern corporate management with clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and profit-sharing arrangements that ensure efficient operation of prophetic services while protecting senior personnel from legal liability associated with fraudulent religious practices. The high priest serves as chief executive officer of a religious corporation that generates enormous revenue through systematic exploitation of superstitious customers seeking supernatural guidance. The appointment scheduling system controls access to prophetic services through complex bureaucratic procedures that prioritize wealthy clients while creating artificial scarcity that inflates prices for divine consultation. Standard appointments require months of advance booking and substantial deposits, while emergency prophetic services command premium prices that exceed annual incomes for most Greek citizens. The scheduling deliberately creates demand that exceeds supply to maximize revenue per oracle session. The interpretation services provided by senior priests transform the Pythia's chemically induced babbling into coherent prophecies through editorial processes that involve multiple staff members who collaborate on creating meaningful divine messages from incoherent toxic utterances. These interpretation teams include literary specialists who craft poetic language, political analysts who ensure prophecies align with current events, and legal experts who create ambiguous wording that protects the temple from liability when predictions prove inaccurate. The payment processing systems accept various forms of compensation including cash, precious metals, agricultural products, military services, and political favours that enable diverse clients to purchase prophetic services regardless of their specific financial resources. The temple maintains exchange rates for different payment types, while offering financing arrangements that allow major clients to receive immediate prophetic guidance while arranging extended payment schedules for substantial consultation fees. The quality assurance procedures ensure customer satisfaction through follow-up services that provide additional interpretation when initial prophecies prove difficult to understand or implement. Clients who express dissatisfaction with their oracle experiences receive complimentary consultation sessions, designed to clarify divine messages while maintaining customer loyalty that generates repeat business and positive referrals to potential new clients. The political liaison operations involve temple representatives who coordinate with government officials to ensure that major prophecies support state policy objectives while avoiding predictions that might destabilize political arrangements beneficial to temple interests. These political consultations occur behind closed doors where priests negotiate the content of divine messages based on diplomatic considerations rather than supernatural inspiration. An unusual aspect of temple administration involves the blackmail operations that exploit private information gathered during confidential oracle consultations to pressure clients into providing additional payments or political support for temple interests. The priests maintain detailed records of personal secrets revealed during prophetic sessions, creating intelligence files that enable ongoing manipulation of influential customers through threats of embarrassing disclosure. The staff training programs prepare junior priests for various administrative roles through apprenticeships that teach both religious procedures and business management techniques required for successful oracle operations. These training programs include courses in customer psychology, chemical safety, medical emergency response, and financial accounting that enable efficient temple management while maintaining the religious facade that conceals commercial operations. The franchise development activities involve establishing branch oracle operations at distant locations where local priests operate under Delphic authority while sharing revenue with the central temple administration. These satellite operations extend prophetic services to regional markets while maintaining quality control standards that protect the Delphic brand reputation for reliable divine communication. The marketing campaigns promote oracle services through testimonials from satisfied customers, strategic placement of favourable prophecies in public forums, and sponsorship of athletic and cultural events that enhance temple visibility while demonstrating the practical benefits of divine guidance for successful political and military ventures. The competitive intelligence operations monitor rival oracle sites to identify superior techniques, pricing strategies, and customer service innovations that might threaten Delphic market dominance. Temple agents attend competing oracle sessions while gathering information about alternative prophetic methods that could be adopted or countered through improved service offerings. The legal department manages litigation arising from unsatisfied customers who claim fraudulent prophetic services, while maintaining relationships with government officials who provide regulatory protection for temple operations. These legal specialists develop sophisticated arguments about the inherent uncertainty of divine communication that protect the temple from accountability when prophecies prove completely inaccurate. The International Relations Office coordinates with foreign governments and religious institutions to expand prophetic services into new markets while negotiating diplomatic immunity for temple operations that might violate local laws regarding fraudulent religious practices. These international agreements enable global expansion of Greek oracle services while protecting priests from prosecution in territories with stricter regulations. Historians still argue whether temple priests genuinely believed in divine inspiration or cynically exploited religious superstitions for personal enrichment. Though the documented sophistication of administrative systems and revenue optimization techniques suggests that commercial considerations dominated religious concerns in oracle operations, the accounting procedures track revenue streams from different service categories while maintaining separate financial records for legitimate religious activities and questionable commercial practices that might attract unwanted government attention. These accounting systems enable tax avoidance while providing plausible explanations for enormous temple wealth that exceeds what normal religious donations could generate. The personnel management policies address the high turnover rates among oracle staff, who suffer occupational injuries from chemical exposure, psychological damage from participating in fraudulent religious activities, and social isolation resulting from maintaining professional secrecy about temple operations. These human resource challenges require recruitment strategies that identify vulnerable individuals willing to sacrifice personal welfare for institutional loyalty. The emergency response protocols prepare temple personnel for situations where oracle sessions result in serious medical emergencies, customer violence, or government investigations that threaten temple operations. These contingency plans include medical procedures for treating chemical poisoning, security measures for managing angry clients, and escape routes for senior priests who might face criminal prosecution, as you observe the complex bureaucratic machinery that transforms chemically induced seizures into profitable divine wisdom while protecting administrators from legal consequences and maintaining customer satisfaction through professional deception. You realize that ancient oracle operations represented sophisticated fraud enterprises that exploited religious beliefs for commercial gain, proving that institutional corruption often hides behind spiritual authority to avoid accountability for systematic exploitation. Do you remember how oracle operations represented sophisticated fraud enterprises that exploited religious beliefs for commercial gain? That commercial corruption becomes even more sinister when you witness how political rulers systematically manipulated divine messages to justify military aggression. Forced marriages and territorial expansion through carefully orchestrated consultations where prophetic outcomes were predetermined before the drugged Pythia ever entered her toxic chamber, transforming a religious authority into a weapon of mass deception that enabled tyrants to claim divine approval for their most brutal and self-serving policies. you're observing a secret meeting between King Croesus of Lydia and Delphic priests, where the terms of a favourable prophecy are negotiated months before the official oracle consultation, with enormous bribes changing hands while temple administrators draft divine messages that will justify the king's planned invasion of Persia by claiming supernatural approval for military adventures that serve royal ambition rather than divine will. The standard procedure for political oracle manipulation begins with private negotiations between government representatives and temple administrators who establish the desired prophetic outcome while arranging appropriate compensation for divine cooperation. These preliminary meetings occur in confidential settings, where rulers specify exactly what divine messages they require, while priests calculate the appropriate fees for producing customized supernatural authorization for predetermined political decisions. The payment structures for political prophecies exceed normal consultation fees by enormous margins, with major military campaigns requiring advance payments equivalent to annual temple revenues from ordinary religious services. Kings and city-states often mortgage future tax collections to afford the premium prices charged for divine authorization of territorial expansion. Succession disputes, and alliance formations that require supernatural justification to maintain public support. The collaborative writing process for political prophecies involves teams of priests who craft ambiguous language that appears to provide divine authorization, while including escape clauses that protect the temple from accountability when political ventures fail catastrophically. These prophetic compositions require literary sophistication that creates multiple possible interpretations while maintaining religious credibility that convinces audiences of genuine divine communication. The timing coordination between oracle consultations and political announcements ensures that divine messages reach public audiences precisely when rulers need supernatural support for controversial policies that might otherwise face popular opposition. Temple administrators synchronize prophetic revelations with political calendars, while ensuring that divine guidance appears spontaneous rather than carefully orchestrated to support predetermined government decisions. The historical documentation reveals that Delphi consistently provided prophecies supporting whichever side offered superior compensation during conflicts between rival Greek city-states, demonstrating that divine favour followed financial incentives rather than moral principles or supernatural preferences. The temple's neutrality in political disputes lasted only until one faction's bribery exceeded their opponent's capacity for prophetic investment. The case study of Spartan expansion illustrates how oracle manipulation enabled military aggression through divine authorization that transformed land grabs into religious obligations mandated by Apollo himself. Spartan rulers received prophecies commanding territorial conquest, while promising divine protection during military campaigns that enriched Sparta while generating substantial prophetic fees for Delphic administrators who blessed aggressive expansion with supernatural approval. An unusual example of prophetic manipulation involves the Oracle of Ammon in Egypt, which provided Alexander the Great with divine confirmation of his supposed parentage by Zeus, creating supernatural justification for his claim to rule both Macedonia and the emerging Hellenistic Empire. This prophetic consultation was carefully arranged by Alexander's political advisors, who understood that divine legitimacy could overcome challenges to his royal authority from traditional aristocratic rivals. The marriage politics facilitated by oracle manipulation enabled rulers to justify dynastic alliances through prophetic commands that overrode popular objections to foreign marriages or succession arrangements that served political convenience rather than national interests. Divine messages regularly ordered royal marriages that consolidated power while enriching both ruling families and the temples that provided supernatural authorization for these political arrangements. The territorial expansion justified through prophetic manipulation transformed aggressive imperialism into religious obligation by claiming that divine commands required conquest of neighbouring territories for spiritual rather than material reasons. Rulers who wanted to seize valuable resources or strategic positions could purchase divine authorization that reframed military aggression as pious obedience to supernatural mandates. The diplomatic applications of oracle manipulation involve international negotiations, where competing states attempt to secure divine authorization for their respective positions in territorial disputes, trade agreements, and alliance formations. These diplomatic prophecies often favour whichever government offers superior bribes, while creating religious justifications for political decisions that serve economic interests rather than spiritual principles. The public relations campaigns surrounding political prophecies include elaborate ceremonies and public announcements designed to convince populations that government policies enjoy divine approval despite serving elite interests that conflict with public welfare. These propaganda operations transform oracle consultations into political theatre, where rulers demonstrate their supernatural connections while concealing the commercial transactions that produced favourable divine messages. The succession planning facilitated by prophetic manipulation enables royal families to secure divine authorization for preferred inheritance arrangements that bypass traditional succession laws or popular preferences for alternative candidates. Oracle messages regularly support controversial succession decisions, while providing supernatural justification for political arrangements that serve family interests rather than national stability. The legal applications of oracle manipulation involve using divine messages to justify changes in laws, court decisions, and administrative policies that might otherwise face legal challenges or constitutional objections. Prophetic authorization transforms arbitrary political decisions into religious obligations that citizens must accept regardless of their personal opinions about government policies. The military recruitment enhanced by oracle manipulation uses divine commands to justify conscription policies, strategic decisions, and alliance commitments that serve political goals rather than genuine security needs. Rulers who want to pursue expensive military ventures can purchase prophetic authorization that transforms costly wars into religious obligations that citizens must support despite economic hardship or personal sacrifice. Historians still argue whether political manipulation of oracle prophecies reflected cynical exploitation of religious authority or genuine belief in divine guidance that happened to align with political convenience. Though the documented correlation between prophetic outcomes and financial payments suggests that commercial considerations influenced divine messages more than supernatural inspiration, the international competition for favourable oracle messages creates bidding wars between rival states attempting to secure divine authorization for competing claims to disputed territories, trade routes, and political authority. These prophetic auctions demonstrate that divine favour depends on financial resources rather than moral legitimacy or spiritual worthiness. The long-term consequences of prophetic manipulation include public cynicism about religious authority, when oracle predictions consistently favour wealthy patrons while producing disastrous outcomes for populations who suffer the consequences of divinely authorised policies that serve elite interests. This loss of religious credibility undermines social stability while exposing the corrupt relationship between political power and spiritual authority. As you witness rulers purchasing divine authorization for policies that serve personal ambition, while claiming supernatural mandate for decisions that damage public welfare, you realize that political manipulation of oracle prophecies represents one of history's most sophisticated propaganda systems, proving that religious authority can be weaponized to justify almost any government policy through careful management of supernatural communication that transforms political expedience into divine command. Do you remember how political manipulation transformed religious authority into weapons for justifying government policies? Those weaponized prophecies achieved their most devastating impact through specific historical predictions that toppled entire civilizations and launched legendary adventures whose consequences echoed across centuries. Proving that cryptic divine messages could reshape the ancient world more effectively than armies or natural disasters, when rulers interpreted ambiguous oracle utterances as supernatural authorization for catastrophically destructive decisions. You're tracing the ripple effects of history's most influential oracle prophecies, beginning with the consultation that destroyed the wealthy kingdom of Lydia when King Croesus received the infamous prediction that if you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire. The king interpreted this message as divine authorization for attacking Persia, never suspecting that the great empire destined for destruction was his own prosperous realm rather than Cyrus's expanding Persian territories. The Croesus prophecy represents the perfect example of Delphic ambiguity, designed to protect temple reputation regardless of political outcomes, while generating maximum drama for future prophetic marketing campaigns. The oracle's carefully crafted language ensured that temple priests could claim accuracy whether Croesus won or lost his military gamble, creating a propaganda victory that enhanced Delphi's reputation for supernatural insight despite providing information that contributed directly to royal downfall. The Athenian prophecy preceding the Persian Wars demonstrates how oracle manipulation could influence military strategy through divine messages that appear to provide tactical guidance while actually reflecting political negotiations between temple administrators and government officials. When Athenians received advice to trust in wooden walls, competing interpretations created political debates about whether divine guidance referred to ships or fortifications, ultimately shaping naval strategy that proved crucial during the Battle of Salamis. The prophetic chain reaction surrounding the Trojan War illustrates how oracle consultations could escalate minor disputes into legendary conflicts that consumed entire civilizations through supernatural authorization for military ventures that served elite ambitions rather than genuine security needs. Multiple oracle sites provided divine authorization for Greek participation in the Trojan expedition, creating religious justification for a decade-long war that generated enormous profits for temple institutions while devastating participating city-states. The Oedipus prophecy demonstrates the psychological manipulation possible through carefully crafted predictions that created self-fulfilling outcomes by influencing behavior in ways that ensured prophetic accuracy through human action rather than supernatural foresight. The prediction that Oedipus would kill his father and marry his mother shaped his life decisions in ways that made the prophecy inevitable, illustrating how oracle messages could control individual destinies through psychological manipulation. The Alexander prophecy at the Oracle of Ammon in Egypt provided divine confirmation of Alexander's supposed divine parentage that justified his imperial ambitions, while creating supernatural authorization for conquest that spread Greek culture across 3 continents. This strategically timed consultation generated religious legitimacy for Alexander's expansion, while demonstrating how oracle manipulation could influence international politics through claims of divine heritage. An unusual prophecy involved the Oracle of Delphi's advice to Athenian colonists seeking guidance about establishing settlements in Sicily, resulting in divine authorization for territorial expansion that created prosperous Greek colonies while generating ongoing consultation fees from successful colonial administrators who attributed their prosperity to supernatural guidance rather than favourable geographic and economic conditions. The Spartan prophecies regarding the Messenian Wars provided divine authorization for aggressive expansion that enslaved entire populations, while creating religious justification for policies that violated traditional Greek concepts of justice and legitimate warfare. These oracle consultations demonstrate how prophetic manipulation could overcome moral objections to brutal military campaigns through supernatural authorization that transformed war crimes into religious obligations. The prophetic influence on the Peloponnesian War involved oracle consultations by both Athens and Sparta, seeking divine authorization for conflict strategies, while temple administrators provided ambiguous guidance that prolonged warfare by encouraging both sides to continue fighting rather than pursuing diplomatic solutions that might have ended hostilities without the devastating consequences that weakened all Greek city-states. The economic impact of major prophecies includes the financial consequences of military campaigns, territorial expansion, and political decisions that were justified through oracle consultations but resulted in economic disasters that impoverished entire populations while enriching the temple institutions that provided divine authorization for catastrophically expensive policy decisions. The cultural transformation enabled by prophetic authorization includes religious and social changes that were implemented through divine commands that overrode traditional customs and popular preferences, while serving elite interests that conflicted with established cultural practices. Oracle messages regularly authorized cultural innovations that benefited ruling classes while disrupting social stability. The technological advancement influenced by oracle prophecies includes engineering projects, military innovations, and architectural developments that were justified through divine commands while actually serving political and economic interests that required supernatural authorization to overcome popular resistance to expensive and disruptive technological changes. The diplomatic revolution caused by prophetic manipulation involves international relationships that were restructured through oracle consultations that provided divine authorization for alliance changes, territorial agreements, and trade arrangements that served political convenience rather than genuine strategic interests or economic necessity. The legal transformation facilitated by oracle prophecies includes judicial reforms, constitutional changes, and administrative modifications that were implemented through divine authorization while serving elite interests that conflicted with traditional legal principles and popular concepts of justice. Historians still argue whether the historical impact of famous prophecies reflected genuine supernatural intervention or sophisticated political manipulation that exploited religious authority to justify predetermined policy decisions. Though the documented correlation between prophetic outcomes and elite interests suggests that divine messages served political convenience more than supernatural wisdom. The succession crisis prophecies involve oracle consultations that determined royal inheritance, governmental transitions, and leadership selections through divine authorization that served factional interests while claiming supernatural legitimacy for political arrangements that might otherwise have faced popular opposition or legal challenges. The military strategy influenced by prophetic guidance includes tactical decisions, strategic planning, and operational choices that were justified through oracle consultations while actually serving political objectives that required religious authorization to overcome military objections to ineffective or dangerous combat policies. The long-term historical consequences of major prophecies include political instability, economic disruption, and social transformation that resulted from decisions justified through oracle consultations but implemented to serve elite interests rather than genuine public welfare or national security needs. The modern reassessment of historical prophecies reveals that most famous oracle predictions provided ambiguous guidance that could be interpreted to support any political outcome while generating propaganda benefits for both temple institutions and political rulers who claimed divine authorization for their policy preferences. As you trace the devastating chain reactions that connected cryptic prophetic utterances to historical catastrophes spanning centuries and continents, you realize that oracle prophecies achieved their legendary impact not through supernatural foresight, but through psychological manipulation that influenced human decision-making in ways that ensured prophetic accuracy through behavioral control rather than divine intervention, proving that religious authority could reshape civilization by exploiting human psychology rather than revealing supernatural truth. Do you remember how oracle prophecies achieved their impact through psychological manipulation that controlled human behavior rather than supernatural revelation? That behavioral control began with the systematic destruction of individual identity among women selected to serve as oracles, whose daily lives were carefully managed through isolation, chemical dependency, and psychological conditioning that transformed independent human beings into biological instruments designed to produce prophetic utterances on command, while sacrificing every aspect of normal human existence for institutional convenience. You're observing the daily routine at the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi, where the current Pythia begins each morning with mandatory exposure to underground vapours that maintain her chemical dependency, while ensuring her continued susceptibility to the toxic substances that enable prophetic trance states. Her day starts before dawn with supervised inhalation sessions, designed to establish baseline intoxication levels that prepare her nervous system for the more intensive chemical exposure required during actual oracle consultations. The living quarters provided for oracles resemble prison cells more than religious accommodations, with sparse furnishing and constant surveillance that prevents any unauthorized contact with the outside world while maintaining institutional control over every aspect of the oracle's existence. The Pythia sleeps on a simple stone bed in an underground chamber where toxic vapours seep continuously from geological fissures, ensuring that her body never fully recovers from chemical exposure while maintaining optimal conditions for prophetic readiness. The dietary regimen imposed on oracles includes specific foods and beverages designed to enhance their sensitivity to chemical manipulation, while maintaining their physical health at levels sufficient for performing prophetic duties. The oracle receives measured portions of barley water, honey, and specially prepared grain products that contain ergot alkaloids and other psychoactive compounds that reinforce the effects of vapor exposure while creating nutritional dependency that prevents escape from temple control. The physical training required for oracle service involves exercises designed to strengthen respiratory capacity while building tolerance for toxic gas exposure that would incapacitate normal individuals. The oracle must practice controlled breathing techniques that maximize vapor absorption while maintaining vocal stamina sufficient for delivering extended prophetic sessions during peak pilgrimage seasons when demand for divine guidance reaches maximum intensity. The psychological conditioning program systematically breaks down the oracle's connection to her previous identity, while replacing personal autonomy with institutional loyalty that prioritizes temple needs over individual welfare. This conditioning involves sensory deprivation, social isolation, and chemical manipulation that gradually destroys independent thought while creating psychological dependency on temple personnel who control access to basic necessities including food, shelter, and human contact. The education curriculum for oracles includes training in vocal techniques that enable delivery of prophetic utterances in the distinctive style associated with divine communication, while learning enough classical references to make their chemically impaired speech appear sophisticated to educated visitors. However, this education remains limited to prevent oracles from developing intellectual independence that might interfere with institutional control over their prophetic pronouncements. The medical monitoring of oracles involves daily health assessments that track the cumulative effects of chemical exposure while managing the chronic conditions that develop from prolonged toxic vapor inhalation. Temple physicians document respiratory damage, neurological deterioration, and psychological changes that accompany oracle service while treating these occupational injuries as necessary sacrifices for divine communication rather than preventable medical problems. An unusual aspect of oracle training involves developing tolerance for sacred snake bites that inject additional neurotoxins into the oracle's bloodstream during prophetic sessions. The oracle must gradually build immunity to specific venom types while learning to interpret the hallucinations and physical effects that result from controlled poisoning as divine visions rather than simple chemical reactions. The social isolation imposed on oracles prevents them from maintaining relationships with family members, friends, or anyone outside the temple community while creating artificial social bonds with priestly supervisors who control access to human interaction. This isolation serves both security and psychological functions by preventing external influences that might interfere with institutional control while creating emotional dependency on temple personnel. The work schedule for oracles varies based on seasonal demand for prophetic services, with intensive consultation periods during major festivals requiring daily exposure to maximum toxic vapor concentrations that push the oracle's chemical tolerance to dangerous limits. During peak seasons, the oracle may perform multiple prophetic sessions weekly while maintaining continuous low-level intoxication between consultations. The recreational activities permitted to oracles remain strictly controlled and primarily involve religious practices that reinforce their role as divine vessels, while preventing development of personal interests or individual identity that might conflict with institutional requirements. The oracle's leisure time consists mainly of prayer, meditation, and ritual observances that maintain psychological conditioning while providing minimal personal satisfaction. The communication restrictions prevent oracles from speaking about their experiences, expressing personal opinions, or maintaining correspondence with external contacts while requiring them to communicate primarily through formal religious language that reinforces their role as divine mouthpieces rather than independent human beings. Normal conversation becomes impossible as the oracle's vocabulary and thought patterns adapt to institutional requirements. The advancement opportunities for oracles remain non-existent since their role represents the terminal position in a religious hierarchy that values them only for their biological capacity to survive toxic exposure while producing incomprehensible utterances that priests can interpret as divine wisdom. Career development consists entirely of learning to endure increasingly severe chemical exposure without dying. The retirement planning for oracles typically involves preparation for early death, from cumulative toxic exposure, rather than normal aging and gradual withdrawal from active service. Few oracles survive long enough to experience retirement, and those who do often suffer permanent neurological and respiratory damage that requires ongoing medical care while providing no institutional pension or support for disabled former personnel. Historians still argue whether oracle training reflected genuine religious education or systematic abuse designed to create chemically dependent human instruments incapable of independent thought or resistance to institutional control. Though the documented physical and psychological deterioration among oracle personnel suggests that training served administrative convenience rather than spiritual development. The quality of life experienced by oracles deteriorates progressively as chemical exposure accumulates and psychological conditioning intensifies, transforming vibrant village women into damaged individuals whose primary function involves serving as biological interfaces between toxic environmental conditions and religious interpretation systems that exploit their suffering for institutional profit. The emergency medical procedures developed for oracle care focus on managing toxic overdoses, respiratory crises, and psychological breakdowns that regularly occur during intensive prophetic sessions, while maintaining the oracle's functional capacity despite severe impairment that would normally require immediate hospitalization and long-term rehabilitation. As you witness the systematic destruction of human personality through chemical dependency, social isolation, and psychological conditioning that transforms women into interchangeable components in a religious machine designed to generate prophetic authority, you realize that oracle training represented one of history's most sophisticated programs for human exploitation, proving that religious institutions could achieve complete control over individual lives through systematic abuse disguised as spiritual service. Do you remember how oracle training represented systematic human exploitation disguised as spiritual service? That exploitation reaches its logical conclusion when you witness the inevitable outcomes awaiting women who serve as prophetic vessels: death from cumulative chemical poisoning, permanent madness from neurological damage, or complete psychological breakdown that renders them useless for generating divine utterances, triggering macabre succession rituals where fresh victims replace the damaged or deceased through ceremonies that treat human beings as interchangeable machinery requiring periodic maintenance and replacement. You're attending the somber ceremony marking the death of yet another Pythia, who succumbed to respiratory failure after 3 years of service, her lungs finally unable to process the toxic vapours that enabled her prophetic abilities, while temple physicians document her demise as divine translation rather than occupational death from chemical exposure. The deceased oracle joins dozens of previous Pythias, whose abbreviated lifespans reflect the lethal nature of prophetic service disguised as religious honour. The mortality statistics for oracle service reveal average lifespans that rarely exceed 5 years after initial appointment, with most deaths resulting from respiratory complications, neurological deterioration, or organ failure caused by prolonged exposure to the toxic gas mixtures that create prophetic trance states. Temple records disguise these statistics by attributing oracle deaths to divine summoning, rather than acknowledging the lethal working conditions that make prophetic service essentially a slow execution method. The madness that affects surviving oracles manifests in various forms of psychological breakdown, including permanent dissociative disorders, chronic hallucinations, and complete loss of personal identity that renders former oracles incapable of normal social functioning, while requiring ongoing institutional care for individuals whose minds have been permanently damaged by chemical exposure and psychological conditioning. The succession planning process begins months before oracle death or incapacitation, as temple administrators identify replacement candidates who demonstrate appropriate susceptibility to chemical manipulation while maintaining sufficient physical resilience to survive the transition process. This planning reflects institutional understanding that oracle mortality represents predictable operational expense rather than tragic loss of human life. The replacement rituals involve elaborate ceremonies that symbolically transfer prophetic authority from the deceased or incapacitated oracle to her successor, through procedures that disguise the administrative nature of personnel changes as supernatural transformation involving divine selection rather than human management decisions. These rituals serve propaganda functions by creating impressive demonstrations of religious authority while concealing the mechanical aspects of oracle replacement. The disposal procedures for deceased oracles include special burial rites that prevent public examination of bodies that might reveal evidence of chemical poisoning or other occupational injuries that could compromise temple reputation for providing safe spiritual service. The burial locations remain secret while temple personnel claim that oracle remains possess dangerous supernatural properties that require careful handling by religious specialists. The medical documentation of oracle deterioration includes detailed records of physical and psychological decline that temple physicians maintain for research purposes while developing improved chemical exposure protocols that maximize prophetic effectiveness while extending oracle lifespans enough to justify investment in training and preparation procedures. These medical studies treat oracles as experimental subjects rather than patients requiring care. An unusual aspect of oracle succession involves the preservation of personal effects from deceased oracles that supposedly retain prophetic energy but actually serve as psychological props for manipulating successor oracles who inherit the contaminated belongings of their predecessors. These artifacts include clothing, jewelry, and religious implements that contain residual chemical contamination that contributes to the new oracle's conditioning process. The psychological preparation of replacement oracles includes exposure to detailed accounts of their predecessors' experiences designed to create appropriate expectations about prophetic service while discouraging resistance to procedures that previous oracles endured without complaint. This psychological conditioning uses peer pressure from deceased oracles to overcome natural reluctance to participate in obviously dangerous activities. The emergency succession procedures address situations where oracle death or incapacitation occurs during peak pilgrimage seasons, when prophetic services cannot be interrupted without damaging temple revenue and reputation. These emergency protocols include rapid replacement procedures that accelerate training programs while accepting higher mortality rates among hastily prepared oracles who lack adequate conditioning for intensive chemical exposure. The financial implications of oracle replacement include costs associated with recruiting, training, and maintaining multiple candidates while managing the economic losses that result from prophetic service interruptions during succession transitions. Temple administrators develop cost-benefit analyses that balance oracle mortality rates against revenue generation to optimize institutional profitability despite regular personnel replacement requirements. The cover-up procedures for oracle deaths involve creating alternative explanations for mortality that protect temple reputation while preventing government investigation into occupational safety conditions that might reveal the systematic nature of oracle deaths. These cover-ups include bribing local officials, intimidating potential witnesses, and creating false documentation about oracle health conditions. The training acceleration programs for emergency replacements involve intensive conditioning procedures that compress normal preparation periods into weeks rather than months while accepting elevated mortality rates among oracles who receive inadequate preparation for toxic exposure. These accelerated programs demonstrate institutional priorities that value operational continuity over human welfare. The quality control measures for oracle replacement include evaluation procedures that assess successor oracles' performance compared to their predecessors while making adjustments to chemical exposure protocols and psychological conditioning techniques based on the observed effectiveness in generating convincing prophetic utterances. The institutional memory preservation involves documenting successful oracle management techniques while maintaining records of effective chemical exposure protocols and psychological conditioning methods that enable consistent prophetic performance despite regular personnel turnover caused by mortality and mental breakdown. Historians still argue whether temple administrators understood the fatal nature of oracle service or genuinely believed that divine forces cause oracle deaths and madness. Though the documented sophistication of succession planning and replacement procedures suggests institutional awareness that prophetic service involved predictable mortality rather than supernatural calling. The regional competition for oracle replacements creates recruitment challenges as word spreads about the dangerous nature of prophetic service, while temple administrators must identify vulnerable women who lack family protection or economic alternatives that would enable them to refuse oracle appointment despite obvious risks to personal health and survival. The medical research conducted on oracle remains enables temple physicians to develop improved understanding of chemical exposure effects while refining toxic gas protocols that optimize prophetic performance within mortality constraints that balance institutional needs against personnel replacement costs. The long-term impact of oracle mortality includes cumulative effects on local populations where temples recruit replacement oracles, while communities gradually recognize the fatal nature of prophetic service, despite religious propaganda that presents oracle deaths as divine honor rather than occupational hazard. As you observe the callous efficiency with which temple administrators process oracle deaths while preparing replacement personnel for identical fates, treating human beings as expendable resources whose value derives entirely from their biological capacity to survive chemical exposure long enough to generate profitable prophetic utterances, you realize that ancient religious institutions achieved their supernatural authority through systematic human sacrifice, disguised as spiritual service, proving that divine wisdom often depends on mortal suffering that religious propaganda transforms into sacred honor. Do you remember how religious institutions achieved supernatural authority through systematic human sacrifice disguised as spiritual service? That callous exploitation intensified dramatically when competing oracle sites engaged in bitter commercial warfare that transformed religious consultation into competitive marketplace where temples fought vicious propaganda campaigns to monopolize divine authority while sabotaging rival institutions through industrial espionage, character assassination, and outright violence that proved ancient Greek spirituality operated according to business principles rather than theological concerns. You're witnessing a clandestine meeting between Delphic agents and disgruntled priests from the Oracle of Zeus at Dodona, where intelligence about competing prophetic techniques is exchanged for substantial bribes while temple spies gather information about rival chemical enhancement methods, customer pricing strategies, and vulnerable personnel who might be recruited to sabotage competing oracle operations through deliberate contamination or strategic personnel defection. The market analysis conducted by major oracle sites reveals detailed intelligence about competitor pricing, customer satisfaction rates, and prophetic accuracy statistics that enable sophisticated business strategies designed to capture market share from rival temples while protecting proprietary techniques that provide competitive advantages in the lucrative divination industry. These commercial analyses treat religious services as products requiring marketing research, rather than spiritual guidance requiring theological consideration. The propaganda campaigns launched by competing oracle sites include systematic disinformation about rival temples' prophetic accuracy, customer service quality, and religious authenticity while promoting their own supernatural credentials through carefully orchestrated public relations efforts that manipulate customer perceptions about divine favor and institutional legitimacy. These propaganda wars use modern marketing techniques applied to ancient religious competition. The industrial espionage operations involve temple agents who infiltrate competing oracle sites as pilgrims, junior priests, or service personnel while gathering intelligence about chemical enhancement techniques, facility security, personnel vulnerabilities, and financial operations that could be exploited to damage rival institutions or steal proprietary prophetic technologies. These espionage networks operate with sophistication that rivals modern corporate intelligence services. The price warfare between oracle sites includes aggressive discounting of prophetic services, promotional packages that bundle multiple consultations at reduced rates, and premium service offerings that provide expedited divine guidance for customers willing to pay superior fees while undercutting competitor pricing strategies through loss leader promotions designed to capture market share despite reduced profit margins. The customer poaching operations target high-value clients who regularly consult rival oracle sites through personalized marketing campaigns that offer superior service quality, more favorable prophecies, or exclusive access to premium divine guidance that competing temples cannot match. These customer acquisition strategies include detailed profiles of competitor clients and their specific prophetic preferences. The sabotage activities directed against rival oracle sites include contamination of chemical enhancement systems, recruitment of insider personnel who compromise prophetic quality, and strategic misinformation campaigns that damage competitor reputations while creating opportunities for market expansion. These sabotage operations occasionally escalate to physical violence against rival personnel or facility infrastructure. An unusual competitive strategy involves the Oracle of Apollo at Claros, developing specialized expertise in medical prophecies that directly challenged Epidaurus's market dominance in healing consultation while offering superior diagnostic accuracy through chemical enhancement techniques that produced more convincing medical visions than traditional snakebite therapy used by competing healing oracles. The territorial expansion efforts by major oracle sites include establishing branch operations in strategic locations, while negotiating exclusive consultation rights with government officials who control access to lucrative political prophecy markets. These territorial disputes create conflicts that resemble modern franchise wars between competing business chains seeking to monopolize regional markets. The quality assurance comparisons between oracle sites reveal significant variations in prophetic accuracy, customer satisfaction, and service reliability that create competitive advantages for temples that invest in superior chemical enhancement, personnel training, and facility maintenance while exposing institutions that prioritize profit margins over service quality. The technological innovation driven by oracle competition includes development of improved chemical delivery systems, enhanced vapor concentration techniques, and more sophisticated psychological conditioning methods that enable superior prophetic performance while reducing personnel mortality rates that create competitive disadvantages through frequent oracle replacement requirements. The alliance formations between smaller oracle sites create consortiums that pool resources for competing against major temples while sharing proprietary techniques, customer intelligence, and marketing strategies that enable collective market power despite individual institutional limitations. These religious alliances operate according to business partnership principles rather than theological cooperation. The regulatory capture efforts involve oracle sites bribing government officials to establish favourable regulations that limit competitor operations while protecting their own market positions through legal restrictions on new temple construction, prophetic service licensing, and quality standards that benefit established institutions while creating barriers for potential competitors. The international expansion strategies pursued by successful oracle sites include establishing foreign operations that extend prophetic services to new geographic markets while adapting local chemical enhancement techniques and cultural preferences to maximize customer acceptance in territories with different religious traditions and competitive environments. The merger and acquisition activities among oracle sites include strategic purchases of competing temples, hostile takeovers of vulnerable institutions, and consolidation efforts that reduce market competition while creating economies of scale that improve profitability through shared chemical enhancement facilities and personnel training programs. Historians still argue whether competition between oracle sites reflected genuine religious diversity or commercial warfare disguised as theological differences, though the documented sophistication of competitive strategies and market manipulation techniques suggests that business considerations dominated spiritual concerns in oracle operations. The product differentiation strategies developed by competing oracle sites include specialized prophecy categories, unique chemical enhancement formulations, and distinctive service delivery methods that create market niches while protecting against direct competition from rival institutions offering similar divine guidance services. The customer loyalty programs implemented by oracle sites include repeat customer discounts, referral bonuses, and exclusive access to premium prophetic services that encourage long-term client relationships while reducing customer defection to competing temples offering alternative divine guidance options. The crisis management procedures developed by oracle sites address competitive attacks, negative publicity, and service disruptions that threaten market position, while maintaining customer confidence despite evidence of institutional problems or competitor superiority in specific service categories. The performance benchmarking conducted between oracle sites involves systematic comparison of prophetic accuracy rates, customer satisfaction scores, and financial performance metrics that enable competitive analysis, while identifying best practices that could be adopted to improve institutional effectiveness against rival operations. The trade secret protection measures implemented by Oracle sites include personnel confidentiality agreements, facility security systems, and proprietary technique classification that prevent competitor access to chemical enhancement formulations, psychological conditioning methods, and customer relationship management strategies that provide competitive advantages. The market exit strategies developed by failing Oracle sites include liquidation procedures, asset sales to competing institutions, and personnel transfer agreements that minimize financial losses while preventing complete market withdrawal that could create opportunities for hostile acquisition by rival temples seeking territorial expansion. As you observe the ruthless commercial warfare that transforms ancient Greek spirituality into competitive marketplace where divine authority depends on superior marketing, customer service, and sabotage capabilities rather than genuine religious insight or supernatural connection, you realize that Oracle competition reveals how religious institutions operate according to business principles that prioritize profit maximization over spiritual authenticity, proving that ancient divination represented sophisticated commercial enterprise disguised as sacred service. Do you remember how Oracle competition revealed sophisticated commercial enterprises disguised as sacred service? That religious business model faced its ultimate challenge when Roman legions conquered Greece and subjected Oracle operations to imperial oversight that exposed their fraudulent nature, while Roman skepticism, administrative efficiency, and political control systematically dismantled prophetic traditions that had operated through chemical manipulation and psychological deception for over 8 centuries, proving that supernatural authority crumbles quickly when confronted by rational analysis and bureaucratic regulation. You're observing the Roman Senate's investigation of Delphic operations conducted by Consul Marcus Aemilius Scaurus in 146 BCE, where forensic accountants examine temple financial records that reveal enormous discrepancies between prophetic service revenues and legitimate religious expenses, while chemical engineers analyze vapor composition and medical experts document Oracle mortality rates that expose systematic human exploitation disguised as divine communication. The Roman administrative approach to Oracle oversight involves treating prophetic institutions as business enterprises subject to taxation, regulation, and quality control standards that eliminate the religious exemptions that enabled fraudulent practices while requiring transparent financial reporting that reveals the commercial nature of operations previously concealed through religious secrecy and supernatural claims. The skeptical Roman intellectual tradition challenges Oracle authenticity through rational analysis that demonstrates how chemical manipulation, psychological conditioning, and environmental exploitation create apparent supernatural effects without requiring divine intervention. Roman philosophers like Cicero published detailed exposés of prophetic fraud that used scientific observation to debunk religious claims that had convinced Greek populations for centuries. The political control imposed by Roman authorities includes appointment of imperial supervisors who monitor Oracle operations while ensuring that prophetic pronouncements align with Roman policy objectives, rather than serving local Greek interests or independent religious agendas. This political oversight transforms oracles from autonomous institutions into administrative tools serving imperial propaganda requirements. The taxation policies applied to oracle sites treat prophetic revenue as commercial income subject to imperial taxation that reduces profit margins, while requiring detailed financial documentation that exposes the business operations concealed beneath religious facades. Roman tax collectors demonstrate little respect for religious claims when substantial revenue streams require governmental regulation and taxation. The regulatory enforcement conducted by Roman authorities includes safety inspections that identify dangerous chemical exposure conditions, medical examinations that document occupational injuries among oracle personnel, and facility assessments that reveal environmental hazards previously concealed through religious authority and institutional secrecy that prevented external oversight of prophetic operations. The competitive analysis conducted by Roman administrators reveals market manipulation, price fixing, and territorial agreements between oracle sites that violate imperial commerce regulations, while demonstrating that prophetic institutions operate as business cartels rather than independent religious organisations serving divine rather than commercial purposes. The personnel investigations expose systematic exploitation of vulnerable women through recruitment practices that target economically desperate candidates, while concealing the fatal nature of oracle service through religious propaganda that presents chemical poisoning as spiritual honour rather than occupational hazard requiring safety regulation and worker protection. An unusual aspect of Roman oracle policy involves Emperor Augustus's strategic decision to co-opt, rather than eliminate, certain prophetic institutions by incorporating them into imperial religious administration, while maintaining controlled prophetic services that support Roman political objectives, rather than serving independent Greek religious traditions. The scientific analysis commissioned by Roman authorities includes geological surveys that identify natural gas emissions, chemical testing that reveals toxic compound concentrations, and medical research that documents neurological damage among oracle personnel while providing rational explanations for phenomena previously attributed to supernatural causes that justified religious authority and institutional independence. The legal challenges brought against oracle sites include fraud prosecutions based on evidence of deliberate deception, safety violations that endanger personnel welfare, and conspiracy charges related to political manipulation of prophetic pronouncements that serve factional interests rather than genuine divine guidance or public welfare. The economic impact of Roman regulation includes reduced oracle revenues due to taxation and oversight costs, while increased operational expenses result from safety requirements and personnel protection measures that eliminate cost savings previously achieved through systematic exploitation of oracle personnel and customer manipulation through fraudulent religious claims. The cultural transformation facilitated by Roman conquest includes declining popular belief in oracle authenticity as rational analysis and bureaucratic oversight expose fraudulent practices, while alternative religious and philosophical traditions offer competing explanations for natural phenomena previously monopolized by prophetic institutions through supernatural claims and institutional secrecy. The military surveillance of oracle sites involves intelligence operations that monitor communications between temples and potential resistance groups while preventing oracle institutions from supporting Greek independence movements or anti-Roman political activities that could exploit religious authority for political mobilization against imperial control. The technological advancement promoted by Roman engineering includes improved ventilation systems that reduce toxic gas concentrations, while facility modifications eliminate dangerous chemical exposure conditions that enabled prophetic trance states through environmental poisoning, rather than genuine divine communication or supernatural inspiration. The administrative efficiency imposed by Roman bureaucracy includes standardized record-keeping requirements, personnel management protocols, and quality assurance procedures that eliminate arbitrary practices, while imposing systematic oversight that reveals the mechanical nature of prophetic operations previously concealed through religious mystery and institutional authority. The international coordination between Roman provincial administrators enables empire-wide oracle regulation that prevents problematic temples from relocating to escape oversight, while ensuring consistent policy implementation that eliminates regulatory arbitrage opportunities that might enable continued fraudulent operations in territories with less effective administrative control. Historians still argue whether Roman oracle policies reflected genuine commitment to protecting public welfare or strategic efforts to eliminate Greek religious independence that might challenge imperial authority. Though the documented effectiveness of Roman oversight in exposing fraudulent practices suggests that administrative efficiency achieved legitimate regulatory objectives regardless of underlying political motivations, the personnel retraining programs developed by Roman authorities provide alternative employment opportunities for former oracle personnel, while offering medical treatment for individuals suffering occupational injuries from chemical exposure and psychological conditioning that damaged their health during service in prophetic institutions that prioritized institutional profit over human welfare. The facility conversion projects transform former oracle sites into legitimate religious centers, educational institutions, or administrative buildings that serve public purposes rather than exploiting natural phenomena for commercial gain through fraudulent supernatural claims and systematic human exploitation disguised as spiritual service. The documentation and preservation efforts ensure that evidence of oracle fraud remains available for historical analysis, while preventing future attempts to resurrect similar fraudulent religious operations that might exploit public superstition and regulatory gaps to recreate commercial enterprises disguised as divine communication services. The long-term impact of Roman oracle regulation includes permanent decline in supernatural explanations for natural phenomena, as rational analysis and scientific investigation replace religious mystery with empirical understanding that enables technological advancement and social progress rather than perpetuating ignorance and exploitation through institutional secrecy. As you witness the systematic dismantling of oracle operations through Roman administrative efficiency that exposes centuries of the religious fraud, while protecting vulnerable populations from continued exploitation, you realize that imperial conquest sometimes serves progressive purposes by eliminating institutional corruption and systematic abuse that local traditions were unable or unwilling to address, proving that foreign oversight can achieve social reforms that domestic authorities fail to implement despite obvious evidence of institutional misconduct. Do you remember how Roman administrative efficiency exposed centuries of religious fraud while protecting vulnerable populations from continued exploitation? That ancient rational analysis receives dramatic confirmation through modern archaeological discoveries and scientific research that reveal the shocking mechanical truth behind oracle operations, proving that contemporary technology can finally document the systematic deception that Romans suspected but lacked equipment to verify completely. While chemical analysis, geological surveys, and forensic archaeology provide irrefutable evidence that ancient Greek prophecy represented sophisticated fraud rather than supernatural communication, you're working with international research teams at Delphi, where ground-penetrating radar, chemical spectrometers, and advanced geological equipment confirm what Roman investigators suspected, that prophetic phenomena resulted from deliberate exploitation of natural toxic gas emissions, artificial chemical enhancement, and psychological manipulation rather than divine intervention. While forensic analysis of oracle remains provides disturbing evidence of systematic poisoning disguised as religious service, the geological survey conducted by modern researchers reveals the precise mechanism underlying Delphic prophecy through detailed mapping of underground fault systems that release ethylene, methane, and hydrogen sulfide in concentrations sufficient to create the hallucinogenic effects documented in ancient sources. Gas chromatography analysis confirms that vapor composition matches psychoactive compounds known to produce dissociative states, auditory hallucinations, and loss of motor control that ancient observers interpreted as divine possession. The archaeological excavation of oracle chamber foundations exposes sophisticated engineering modifications that concentrated toxic gas emissions while controlling exposure levels through ventilation systems and chemical enhancement devices that demonstrate systematic understanding of atmospheric manipulation despite ancient Greeks' limited theoretical knowledge of chemistry and toxicology. These engineering discoveries prove that oracle effects resulted from deliberate environmental control rather than accidental geological phenomena. The chemical analysis of residue samples from ancient oracle vessels reveals pharmaceutical preparations containing plant-based hallucinogens, animal venoms, and mineral compounds that enhance natural gas effects while providing precise dosage control that maximize prophetic trance duration without causing immediate death. Modern pharmacology identifies these compounds as powerful neurotoxins that create predictable altered consciousness states when administered according to documented temple protocols. The forensic examination of oracle skeletal remains confirms systematic chemical poisoning through bone tissue analysis that reveals accumulated heavy metals, organic toxins, and neurological damage consistent with chronic exposure to the gas mixtures and pharmaceutical preparations identified through archaeological chemical analysis. These forensic findings provide direct physical evidence that oracle service involved occupational poisoning rather than supernatural transformation. The digital reconstruction of ancient oracle facilities enables virtual reality simulations that demonstrate how architectural design, acoustic engineering, and lighting effects created theatrical environments that enhance psychological manipulation, while concealing the mechanical aspects of prophetic procedures from observing visitors. These reconstructions reveal sophisticated understanding of human psychology applied to religious deception. The isotope analysis of oracle chamber gases provides precise identification of underground source formations, while tracking seasonal variations in emission concentrations that correlate with ancient records of prophetic scheduling and intensity levels. This scientific analysis confirms that oracle operations were deliberately coordinated with natural phenomena that maximized chemical enhancement effects, while maintaining plausible religious explanations for environmental manipulation. The biomolecular archaeology applied to oracle textile samples reveals fabric treatments with psychoactive compounds that provided continuous chemical exposure through skin contact, while identifying plant species and processing techniques used to create garments that functioned as drug delivery systems disguised as religious vestments. These findings demonstrate sophisticated pharmaceutical knowledge applied to textile technology. The environmental archaeology conducted around oracle sites documents ancient waste disposal patterns that reveal systematic disposal of contaminated materials. Deceased oracle remains and chemical preparation equipment, while identifying deliberate concealment efforts designed to prevent detection of fraudulent practices by contemporary authorities or future investigators. An unusual discovery involves ancient graffiti found in hidden oracle facility areas, where staff members recorded cynical observations about fraudulent practices, customer gullibility, and institutional corruption, while documenting specific chemical formulations and psychological manipulation techniques that provide direct testimony about deliberate deception from oracle personnel themselves. The medical analysis of ancient medical papyri reveals treatment protocols for oracle-related injuries including respiratory damage, neurological disorders, and psychological breakdown, while identifying pharmaceutical interventions designed to manage occupational hazards associated with prophetic service rather than treating natural medical conditions unrelated to chemical exposure. The computational modelling of ancient atmospheric conditions enables precise calculation of toxic gas concentrations and duration effects, while simulating optimal exposure protocols that maximize prophetic trance states within survival parameters that balance institutional needs against personnel mortality rates through mathematical optimization of chemical exposure variables. The materials science analysis of oracle equipment reveals sophisticated metallurgy and chemical engineering that enabled precise control of gas delivery systems, while identifying tool wear patterns that document systematic use of chemical enhancement devices over extended periods, rather than occasional supernatural phenomena requiring no human intervention or technical equipment. The interdisciplinary collaboration between archaeologists, chemists, physicians, and psychologists provides comprehensive understanding of oracle mechanisms that combines physical evidence with medical knowledge about toxic exposure effects, while identifying specific neurological and psychological changes that explain documented oracle behavior through scientific analysis, rather than supernatural interpretation. The international database compiled from oracle site investigations across the Mediterranean region reveals consistent patterns of environmental manipulation, chemical enhancement, and architectural modification that demonstrate widespread use of similar fraudulent techniques, while eliminating possibility that documented phenomena resulted from unique local conditions or isolated supernatural events. The experimental archaeology projects that attempt to recreate oracle conditions using authentic materials and techniques confirm that documented gas concentrations produce predictable altered consciousness states in volunteer subjects, while demonstrating that ancient chemical preparations create effects identical to those described in historical sources without requiring supernatural explanation. Historians still argue whether ancient oracle operators understood the scientific mechanisms underlying their practices, or achieved effective results through trial and error methods without comprehending chemical and psychological principles. Though the documented sophistication of equipment and procedures suggests practical knowledge that exceeded theoretical understanding of underlying scientific concepts. The public education initiatives based on scientific oracle research include museum exhibitions, documentary productions, and educational programs that present archaeological evidence while explaining how rational analysis can demystify phenomena that previous generations attributed to supernatural causes due to limited scientific knowledge and investigative technology. The ethical considerations raised by oracle research include questions about appropriate treatment of human remains from systematic poisoning, while addressing cultural sensitivity issues related to religious beliefs that may conflict with scientific findings about fraudulent practices in ancient spiritual traditions. The technological applications derived from oracle research include improved understanding of psychoactive compounds, environmental monitoring systems, and archaeological investigation techniques that benefit contemporary medicine. Environmental science and forensic investigation while demonstrating practical benefits of historical research beyond academic knowledge. As you examine irrefutable scientific evidence that documents systematic fraud underlying ancient Greek prophecy, while observing how modern technology can expose deception that fooled entire civilizations for centuries, you realize that archaeological science provides powerful tools for distinguishing between genuine historical phenomena and institutional deception, proving that rational investigation combined with advanced technology can finally reveal truth about human institutions that previous generations accepted without question due to limited analytical capabilities. Do you remember how scientific evidence exposed systematic deception that fooled entire civilizations for centuries? That documented fraud achieved something remarkable despite its corrupt foundation. Oracle traditions influenced human civilization long after their temples crumbled and their chemical secrets were exposed, creating lasting legacies that shaped religious practices, political institutions, and cultural expectations about divine authority in ways that persist today, proving that even fraudulent systems can generate profound historical impact when they address fundamental human needs for guidance, meaning, and supernatural connection. You're tracing the historical pathways through which ancient oracle practices influenced subsequent religious traditions, discovering how early Christian communities adapted prophetic techniques while medieval Islamic scholars preserved Greek divination knowledge, and Renaissance humanists revived classical approaches to supernatural consultation, creating cultural continuity that transmitted oracle influence across millennia despite radical changes in religious, political, and social contexts. The Christian adaptation of oracle traditions includes the development of prophetic ministry, miraculous healing practices, and divine revelation experiences that mirror ancient Greek techniques while substituting Christian theological frameworks for pagan supernatural explanations. Early Christian communities often established their centres at former oracle sites, inheriting both the geographic advantages and institutional knowledge that enabled effective religious authority despite theological opposition to pagan practices. The Islamic preservation of Greek prophetic knowledge occurred through translation movements that maintained classical texts describing oracle procedures, chemical enhancement techniques, and psychological manipulation methods, while Islamic scholars developed sophisticated theoretical frameworks for understanding altered consciousness states and supernatural communication that advanced beyond ancient Greek empirical knowledge through systematic investigation and philosophical analysis. The medieval revival of oracle practices manifested through various forms of divination, mystical experience, and prophetic authority that adapted ancient techniques to Christian and Islamic contexts, while maintaining essential elements of environmental manipulation, chemical enhancement, and psychological conditioning that enabled religious authorities to create convincing supernatural experiences for their followers despite official theological opposition to pagan divination. The Renaissance rediscovery of classical oracle traditions influenced humanist scholars who studied ancient texts while attempting to recreate Greek prophetic techniques through scientific investigation that sought to understand natural mechanisms underlying supernatural phenomena, rather than simply accepting religious explanations for mysterious events that exceeded contemporary scientific knowledge and analytical capabilities. The political legacy of oracle manipulation includes governmental techniques for managing public opinion through carefully crafted messages that appear to derive from supernatural authority while actually serving political objectives, creating propaganda methods that enable rulers to claim divine authorization for controversial policies despite serving personal rather than national interests. The psychological impact of oracle traditions includes cultural expectations about prophetic experience, divine communication, and supernatural authority that influence religious practices across diverse faith traditions, while creating patterns of spiritual seeking that persist in contemporary New Age movements, alternative spirituality, and therapeutic practices that promise access to higher wisdom through altered consciousness states. The literary influence of oracle traditions appears throughout Western literature, where prophetic characters, mysterious guidance, and cryptic predictions provide dramatic elements that reflect continuing cultural fascination with supernatural communication, despite scientific understanding of natural phenomena that eliminates rational justification for believing in genuine divine prophecy or miraculous intervention. An unusual aspect of oracle legacy involves the persistence of Delphic architectural principles in contemporary religious and governmental buildings, where sacred geometry, acoustic design, and atmospheric manipulation create psychological effects that enhance authority and inspire reverence, while unconsciously replicating ancient techniques for environmental manipulation that supported supernatural claims through architectural psychology. The scientific legacy of oracle research includes advancement in understanding psychoactive compounds, environmental toxicology, and altered consciousness states that benefit contemporary medicine, psychology, and neuroscience, while demonstrating how investigation of historical phenomena can generate practical knowledge that improves modern understanding of human physiology and psychological function. The cultural memory of oracle authority persists in popular expressions, metaphorical language, and common assumptions about prophetic wisdom that reflect deep-seated human tendencies to seek guidance from mysterious sources while attributing supernatural significance to ambiguous communications that could be interpreted to support any desired conclusion or personal preference. The economic influence of oracle traditions appears in contemporary industries that provide guidance services, spiritual consultation, and prophetic entertainment while using techniques derived from ancient practices that exploit human psychological vulnerabilities through environmental manipulation, chemical enhancement, and authoritative presentation that creates convincing supernatural experiences despite lacking genuine prophetic capability. The educational impact of oracle studies includes academic programs, research initiatives, and scholarly publications that advance understanding of religious fraud, institutional corruption, and systematic deception while providing historical examples that illuminate contemporary issues related to authority, manipulation, and critical thinking skills required for evaluating extraordinary claims about supernatural phenomena. The technological applications derived from oracle research include therapeutic uses of psychoactive compounds, environmental design principles that influence human behavior, and analytical techniques for detecting fraud and deception that benefit medical practice, architectural psychology, and forensic investigation while demonstrating practical value of historical research beyond academic interest. The ethical lessons provided by oracle history include recognition of human vulnerability to systematic exploitation, institutional corruption disguised as spiritual service, and the importance of rational analysis for evaluating claims about supernatural authority while developing critical thinking skills that protect against contemporary forms of religious fraud and psychological manipulation. Historians still argue whether oracle traditions provided genuine spiritual value despite their fraudulent methods, or whether systematic deception invalidated any positive cultural contributions that might have resulted from prophetic institutions that served human psychological needs through manipulative practices rather than authentic supernatural communication. The global influence of oracle traditions extends beyond Western civilization through cultural exchange that transmitted Greek prophetic techniques to diverse societies, while inspiring similar practices in unrelated cultures that developed independent approaches to supernatural consultation, environmental manipulation, and religious authority that demonstrate universal human tendencies towards seeking divine guidance. The contemporary relevance of oracle research includes applications to modern religious movements, political propaganda, and commercial marketing that use similar techniques for psychological manipulation, while understanding historical examples enables recognition of contemporary fraud and exploitation that employs updated versions of ancient deception methods. And so our journey through the strange and grim world of ancient Greek oracles draws to its gentle close, with the echoes of toxic vapours and mysterious utterances fading into the soft whisper of historical memory. The sacred chambers where drugged priestesses once convulsed in chemical trances now stand empty and silent, their geological secrets finally revealed through the patient work of modern science that illuminates what ancient wisdom concealed in shadow and mystery. The Pythia's voice, once thought to carry Apollo's divine messages, has been forever stilled, her suffering finally understood not as spiritual service but as systematic exploitation that transformed vulnerable women into biological instruments for institutional profit. The marble temples that once drew pilgrims from across the Mediterranean world now crumble peacefully in the Greek sunshine, their political influence replaced by archaeological curiosity and scholarly investigation that seeks truth rather than profitable deception. Let the knowledge of oracle mechanisms serve not to diminish wonder at human creativity and adaptation, but to inspire appreciation for scientific inquiry that can distinguish between genuine mystery and manufactured mystique. Rest knowing that rational investigation provides more reliable guidance than toxic vapours ever could, while human wisdom flourishes best in the clear light of honest inquiry, rather than the artificial shadows of institutional deception. The ancient voices of prophecy have found their peace at last, no longer tormented by chemical manipulation or burdened with supernatural expectations. Their stories preserved not as religious inspiration, but as historical warning about the eternal human tendency to exploit hope and transform desperation into profit through carefully crafted illusions of divine authority. Sweet dreams of clarity and truth. Gentle listener. Sweet dreams.